All right, so today we're going to be diving into something pretty wild. Have you heard about this Clone Alpha thing?
Oh, yeah, I've seen it floating around. It's a humanoid robot, right? It's supposed to be coming out in 2025.
That's the one. And get this, they're only making 279 of these things.
Seriously?
Yeah, it's like the Willy Wonka golden ticket of robots.
I mean, I guess that makes sense if they're trying to, carefully manage this rollout.
Well, we've got a whole stack of research here from Jörg-Owe. So let's try to figure this out. Is this thing going to be a giant leap forward? Or is it something straight out of like a sci-fi thriller?
Right, because it's not just like another gadget. Schneppat's research really dives into this. Clone Alpha is designed to actually mimic human anatomy and movement.
Okay, wait, back up for a second. Replicate human anatomy.
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. Schneppat talks about how clone robotics, they're using this biomimetic approach, which basically means they're taking inspiration from nature, from the human body specifically. So instead of just building a machine, they're starting with the synthetic organs, water-powered artificial muscles, and a super detailed skeletal structure.
So it's like they're building a robot from the inside out.
Pretty much, yeah. It's totally different from how most robots are designed.
Yeah, because I always think of robots as rigid, mechanical framework.
Exactly. But with Clone Alpha, it's all about making it move more like we do.
So how do those water-powered muscles even work?
It's kind of imagine a network of tubes filled with water. And by controlling the pressure and flow of the water within those tubes, they can mimic the way our muscles contract and expand.
Oh, so it's not like little water balloons that are inflating and deflating.
Well,
I mean, that's a good analogy.
Well.
But it's a bit more complicated than that.
Right, of course. But so Schneppat also mentions that Clone Robotics started with a robotic hand. Yeah, they did. They developed this robotic hand that could rotate its thumb. It could even catch a ball.
Really?
Yeah. It was like a proof of concept for their whole approach, this biomimetic approach.
So they literally started with a hand and worked their way up to a full humanoid form.
Exactly. And that hand is pretty impressive. Schneppat points out that each of Clone Alpha's hands has 27 degrees of freedom.
Okay, now, I'm not a robotics expert or anything.
Yeah.
What does degrees of freedom even mean?
So degrees of freedom basically refers to the number of ways a joint or limb can move. Think about your arm, for example. It can bend at the elbow, rotate at the shoulder, twist at the wrist. All those movements add up to a lot of degrees of freedom.
Oh, okay.
And most robots, they have way fewer degrees of freedom.
Yeah.
Which really limits their dexterity.
So with 27 in each hand, Clone Alpha can.
Yeah.
Like thread a needle?
Yeah. Schneppat says it could probably even play the piano.
That is mind-blowing. So it's not just moving like a human, it's having the dexterity to actually perform these really intricate tasks. But I mean, all that movement, that's got to take some serious processing power, right? Does Clone Alpha have a brain, so to speak?
That's where the AI integration comes in. It's not just a fancy machine. Schneppat emphasizes that it's designed to learn and adapt.
Oh, wow.
So it uses these AI algorithms to process information, to learn from experience, and to make decisions in real time.
So it's not just pre-programmed to do specific things. It can actually learn and evolve.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that makes Clone Alpha so revolutionary. Schneppat thinks so, anyway.
This is a lot to process. I mean, it seems like this is a huge leap forward in robotics, but I have to admit, the idea of a robot that can move and learn and adapt like a human, it is a little unsettling.
I get that. And Schneppat definitely acknowledges that. There are a lot of questions and concerns surrounding a technology this advanced.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's what we'll be unpacking next. This is already getting really interesting.
It's definitely unsettling when you start thinking about the bigger picture.
So what are some of the ethical concerns that Schneppat brings up?
Well, one of the big ones is the potential for misuse.
Right, like it falling into the wrong hands.
Exactly. Imagine a robot like Clone Alpha in the hands of malicious actors or authoritarian regimes.
Yeah, that's pretty terrifying.
Right, because we're talking about a robot that can think, learn, act autonomously. It could be a really powerful tool.
Yeah, I mean, we've all seen enough sci-fi movies to know how they could go wrong.
Exactly.
But what about more everyday concerns? Schneppat mentions something about unintended consequences.
Yeah, so it's even with the best intentions, there's always a chance that things could go wrong.
Okay, sure.
So Schneppat asks us to think about what happens if a Clone Alpha malfunctions and causes harm? Who's responsible for that? The owner? The manufacturer? These are really complicated questions, both legally and ethically, especially as this technology becomes more widespread.
Makes sense. It's like with any new technology. There are always going to be those unforeseen challenges.
Exactly.
So Schneepat also talked about consent and autonomy for robots. Now, I have to admit, I'm struggling with that one. They're machines, right?
Right, but Schneepat argues that if a robot looks and acts human, if it can learn and make decisions, then maybe we need to reconsider how we treat it. Like, do we owe it a certain level of respect? Does it have a right to make its own choices, even if we don't agree with them?
And so, I don't even know. It's like we're blurring the lines between machine and being.
Right.
If we create something that looks and acts like us, do we have to treat it like us?
That's the question Schneepat's getting at. He doesn't give any easy answers, but he presents these dilemmas as something that we need to discuss and debate as a society, especially as this technology keeps developing.
So it seems like with Schneepat, he's less interested in giving us answers and more interested in getting us to think critically about all these questions.
Absolutely. His work isn't just about understanding the tech behind Clone Alpha. It's about examining the potential impact on our lives, our values, even how we define what it means to be human.
That is a powerful takeaway. So if we kind of zoom out for a second.
Yeah.
What do you think is the most significant thing about Clone Alpha? Is it the technology, the potential benefits, the ethical concerns?
It's tough to say. I mean, the technology itself is amazing. And the potential benefits.
Yeah.
In healthcare, manufacturing, even personal assistance, those are huge.
Yeah.
But I think what makes Clone Alpha really stand out is that it forces us to confront these questions about our relationship with technology, with intelligence, with ourselves.
They're not just about robots. It's about us.
Exactly. That's a crucial thing to keep in mind as we move into this uncharted territory.
Well, I think we've covered a lot today. From like the nuts and bolts of how Clone Alpha works to the bigger picture, the ethical implications. So what would you say is the key takeaway for our listener?
I think the biggest thing is Clone Alpha is a sign of things to come. It's a major shift in robotics, in artificial intelligence, and it gives us a glimpse into a future where robots are going to be more and more integrated into our lives.
A future that's both exciting and, as we've been discussing, kind of scary.
Definitely. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations now before this technology becomes so normal that we just accept it without question.
So what can our listener do to actually be a part of this conversation? I mean, we're not all robotics experts or ethicists.
You don't have to be. I think the most important thing is to stay informed. Ask questions. Share your thoughts and concerns with others, because this isn't something that experts can solve on their own. It's a societal issue that needs input from everyone. We all have a role to play in shaping this future.
That's a great point. So to our listener out there, what are your thoughts on Clone Alpha? Does it excite you, scare you? Maybe a little bit of both. And what role do you think you'll play in shaping this robot-filled future? Those are some things to think about as we wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
It feels like we've just scratched the surface here.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing how much Jörg-Owe was able to find out about this.
He really pulled together a lot of information.
And it's definitely given us a lot to think about.
Yeah, for sure. Like, one of the big takeaways for me is that Clone Alpha, it's not just this amazing piece of technology. It's like a reflection of us.
Whoa.
You know?
Yeah, that's a pretty profound thought.
We're basically creating these machines in our own image.
And by doing that, we're kind of forced to ask ourselves some pretty big questions about what it means to be human.
Exactly.
Like questions about intelligence, consciousness, what even is existence.
And Schneepat doesn't necessarily give us all the answers, but he does give us the tools to start asking the right questions.
And that might be even more valuable.
I think so. He's really pushing us to engage in this whole conversation, to think critically about the future we're building.
And it's a future that's full of possibilities. Some good, some not so good.
Yeah, for sure.
But ultimately, it's up to us to decide what that future looks like.
I agree.
We have the power to shape this technology, to make sure it benefits humanity.
And that's a really important point. It's not just about the robots, it's about us.
Well said. I think that's a great place to wrap things up. We all have a responsibility here, whether we're experts in this field or not.
Absolutely.
So to everyone listening out there, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep this conversation going.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of Clone Alpha. It's been a fascinating journey.
It really has.
And we hope you'll join us again next time for another exploration of the ideas that are shaping our world. Until then, stay curious.